Hello and welcome back to AP Psychology. I'm Miss Lee, and this is the second video in Unit 2, Introduction to Perception. We have a few learning targets today. We're going to discuss how experience and culture can influence perceptual processes, including perceptual set, context effects, and schema. And we're going to discuss the role of attention in behavior. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and grab your notes and let's get started. So the first thing to know about our brains is they like certain things, and one of the things that they really like is movement. And what will happen is there are some ways that our brains will perceive movement even though there is none there. One of those ways is stroboscopic motion. And this is our tendency to perceive motion in a series of slightly varied still images that are flashed in rapid succession. This is a video that we will be watching in class, and it shows beautifully how our brain perceives stroboscopic motion as a moving image. It is the way that cartoons used to be made, and it works beautifully. Another way that our brain perceives movement is through the phi phenomenon. This is another video that we're going to watch in class, but if you've ever noticed that when lights are flashing at certain speed, like a marquee or flashing lights at a holiday display, they tend to present illusions of motion, even though it really is just lights lighting up at different times. Neon signs use this principle to create motion perception. It draws our attention too. Perceptual constancy is a way that our brain tries to make sense of things. We perceive objects as unchanging, even as illumination and retinal image changes. So the sensory information of the door, the shape is different, but we don't think that the shape of the door has changed. We look at it as being in a different position because we know that doors don't just change their shape randomly. Perceptual constancies include constancies of shape and size. Here's an example of size constancy. So even though we know that what our eyes are seeing is a smaller car, we're not seeing a smaller car. We're probably seeing a car that is further away. And if you think back to our last video, one of the things that our brain uses to make those determinations and perceive the information is through past experiences. There are a lot of different ways that there are relationships between size and distance that our brain picks up through our eyes. One of them is the moon illusion. So if you've ever looked out of your window and seen the moon very low on the horizon, it will usually seem fairly big compared to the way it's going to look a little bit later as it seems to rise up in the sky. So what makes that happen? So cues to the object's distance at the horizon make the moon behind them seem farther away than the moon in the night sky. So because of the context of the items there at the horizon with the moon. And actually there are various explanations. No one has come up with exactly one right answer, but we do know that it is fairly consistent and most of us have experienced that at one time or another. We also talk about the Ponzo illusion. This is when we use background objects to detect an object's distance. So if you look at the two horizontal lines, the yellow lines, the distant yellow bar appears bigger to us because of the depth cues. We feel like the lines are getting further away from us because of the way that the vertical lines seem to converge at the horizon. We talked about this in our last video. Do you remember which depth cue is being used here? Jot it down in your notes if you can. Another illusion that is using size and distance to kind of fool you a little bit is the Muller-Lyer illusion. If you want to pause this video and take out a ruler and measure the two lines, the two vertical lines, they are the same, but they don't look it, do they? And it's because of the opening arrow or closing arrow, other kind of accompanying lines that make them seem longer or shorter. See? They're exactly the same. Here's a fascinating phenomenon known as the Ames room. This is yet another video that we're going to be watching in class that explains how this illusion works. It's really cool. So a couple of facts to know going forward. Sensory deprivation. also known as perceptual isolation. You may think that this is cruel, but there have been experiments done where animals have been raised without exposure to certain aspects of our visual set. These kittens were raised without exposure to horizontal lines, and later on they had difficulty perceiving the horizontal bars that were presented to them. So what this suggests to us is that vision is at least partly an acquired sense. We are able to perceive our sense better as we go along. Another concept is perceptual adaptation. Our visual ability adjusts. So if you artificially change your visual field, for example, using some type of prism glasses or drunk goggles, we can even adjust to an upside down world if we are given enough time. And it basically is just becoming adjusted to that new perception. Perceptual set is a mental predisposition. You are predisposed to perceive one thing or another, a tendency to perceive or notice some aspects of the available sensory data and ignore the other. So if you look at the picture in the middle, depending on what picture you're looking at that is flanking the picture in the middle, on the left it looks like a duck. And so if you look at the middle picture, you see a duck very easily. You see the bill, you see the eye in the middle. But if you start out looking to the right, you see a rabbit. You are more predisposed to be looking for a picture of the rabbit in the illustration. And if you look at it, you can see the ears very clearly and the eyes. Hopefully you can see both of those pictures now that you've been exposed to both parts of the illusion. So my question for you is, how is top-down processing involved here? What is the top-down process that is allowing you to see either the duck or the rabbit first? So the next concept is schema. This includes a list of characteristics of an object or the concept of an object that allows us to mentally categorize information both in the present and future information as we're being exposed to it. It allows us to know the difference between objects. So we know the difference between a chair versus a desk. Maybe we didn't always know that though. This was something that we experienced through more and more refined schemas, and they do develop through experience. They influence how we perceive future unfamiliar information. So when we experience certain pieces of information, it gives us a context, it gives us an idea, and our brains naturally kind of clump familiar items with unfamiliar items if they have similar characteristics. So you see the child's drawing of his father and brothers. This indicates his perception and schema of the body. What he really sees as part of the body are kind of larger upper bodies being bigger than legs. Okay, so let's talk about context effects. A given stimulus can evoke radically different perceptions based on the immediate context of the stimulus. So kind of the story around it is going to influence what someone thinks about it. So let me give you this example. Let's say you got an F in a class and you knew your folks were going to be really angry at you. So instead of just saying, here's my report card, I'm so disgusted with myself, I'm so sorry, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Instead, you told them first that you were arrested for robbing a bank. Even though that's a lie, they're still going to have a different context of your failing grade a little bit differently. They're going to think of that failing grade in just a little bit of a different light compared to being arrested for robbing a bank. And that is a context effect. So it's kind of getting someone to think about things in a little bit of a different background. Cultural context is another idea. Context is instilled by cultures. Things that are acceptable in one culture may not be acceptable in another culture, and it changes our contextual understanding, our contextual ideas of certain things. For example, in most Western cultures, it's really, really a bad thing. It's totally taboo to eat animals that are normally pets in those countries. So if someone suggested eating a dog in the United States, we'd probably get pretty upset. However, many cultures across the world totally do that. It's totally normal. They don't even think twice about it. Your reaction to me just saying that is evidence of the point that I'm trying to make. Our cultural context very much influences a lot of our behavior, and it alters our perception of things. We don't see dogs as a meat item. We don't typically see horses as a meat item, but other cultures may. And that is it for this video. In our next video, we are going to dive into vision. I can't wait to see you then. Bye for now.